Aggregate demand is one of the first things you learn in macroeconomics. Previously, we were learning microeconomics, where we were dealing with the interactions of demand and supply in individual markets. But now we're looking at the whole economy. So aggregate demand is defined as the sum of all real output that all buyers in an economy are able and willing to buy at every given price level in a given period of time, which is usually a year, given the conditions of ceteris paribus. Similar to microeconomic demand, aggregate demand is downward sloping. So as price level increases, real output in the aggregate demand, decreases, and as price level decreases, aggregate demand increases. This is mainly due to the wealth effect, interest rate effect, and international trade effect. The wealth effect describes how, as the price level increases, the value of wealth that buyers in an economy own actually decreases in real terms. So let's say you own a property that's worth 30 cars in 2016. In 2012, the price level in the economy may have increased so that the value of that property may have been maybe worth only 20 cars. So when wealth decreases, consumers feel poorer, so they're less likely to spend. So the total spending, or the value of all goods and services that all buyers in an economy are able and willing to buy in a given period of time, or aggregate demand, will then decrease. So we see as price level increases, aggregate demand goes that way. Interest rates are also dealing with price levels. So when price level increases, what happens is consumers and businesses have to buy things that are more expensive, right? So that means they have to borrow more money. So borrowing more money means that the demand for money would then increase in the money market. And if you're familiar with money markets, this will lead to an increase in interest rates. And when interest rates increase, what happens is the cost of borrowing for consumers and businesses actually goes up. So that means they're less likely to borrow and spend. So the aggregate demand in the economy would fall. The international trade effect concerns the exports and imports into a country. So when price level increases, the relative price of the exports from a country are going to be more expensive. So they're going to be less competitive, and exports are going to decrease. What about imports? Well, price level increases would mean that imports are relatively cheaper. So the import value is going to go up because consumers in the domestic markets are going to import more. And that means that the value of net exports, which is X minus M, so exports minus imports, is going to go down. And that'll decrease aggregate demand. This is because aggregate demand is equal to the sum of consumption expenditure plus investment plus government expenditure plus net exports. Now, whenever these factors are changed, the aggregate demand curve can actually shift entirely. So an increase in aggregate demand could be due to confidence improving for consumers, because they'll spend more if there's better confidence. Similarly with businesses, if there's greater business confidence, they're likely to invest more of their profits into research and development and improved technologies, etc. Confidence is also going to be something that decreases aggregate demand if consumer confidence decreases or business confidence decreases. Indebtedness is how much debt a person or an entity actually owes to the rest of the world. So let's say consumer indebtedness or household indebtedness goes down. That means that that there'll be greater confidence in spending, so that the aggregate demand in terms of C would increase. And also indebtedness can relate to corporate indebtedness. So when a corporate entity has more debt, they're less likely to spend more on investment expenditure, so the I component would decrease. But if there's less indebtedness, then the I component would increase, so increasing aggregate demand. So you can see how when these factors change in different ways, you can affect aggregate demand. Say interest rates. When interest rates increase, the cost of borrowing increases. So there's going to be less consumption expenditure and investment expenditure because people are not going to buy as much as before. So the aggregate demand would fall. But if interest rates go down, it's cheaper to borrow, so there'll be more borrowing and spending. C and I go up. Similarly with taxes, you consider consumption taxes, so household taxes, so personal income taxes, and you have corporate taxes. Less corporate taxes and less household income taxes would mean that well, they have more disposable income, like both of these entities. Well, the businesses would have more profit to invest and spend. Consumers would have more disposable income to spend, both increasing aggregate demand. But if interest rates go up, but if personal taxes go up or household or corporate taxes go up, the opposite's the case. Similarly, the economic and political priorities of governments changing can affect aggregate demand. So, when the government has political priorities on certain activities, they may spend more on it, or spend less on it if they want to disincentivize it. So, this could be with the merit and demerit goods, merit goods and negative externalities of consumption, production, etc. So, externalities play a role here, and also just political agendas. So there could be corruption or whatnot. Economic priorities are considering the economic goals that a country is trying to produce or an economy is trying to gain. So let's say the economy was experiencing a contraction in the business cycle. So if they're experiencing a contraction in the business cycle, what they want to do is consider expansionary fiscal and monetary fiscal policy. So this would lead to the G component actually increasing. So you got to consider those factors. So based on those, aggregate demand can change. Trade protection means that there are barriers to trade in a country. So effectively what that does is trade protection. Let's go with domestic trade protection first. Domestic trade protection are the barriers to trade that are sort of established by a domestic country. So that means imports are going to be more costly on average or harder to get for domestic consumers. So the value of import consumption would decrease, right? So the value of M decreasing would mean that NX would relatively increase. So that means the aggregate demand would increase as well. The income of trading partners is refers to the partners of trade who we are exporting to. So if they have more income, they're going to purchase more of our exports, so the X component is going to increase. Exchange rate is how much one's currency is worth in terms of another currency. So let's say, so yen and euro, pounds. So how much one currency is worth in terms of another. So if your domestic currency is going to be worth more, relatively more, then what that means is the exports you're going to be sending are going to be more pricey for the international buyers. So they're going to buy less. But at the same time, when your exchange rate is strong and your money is of higher value, imports are going to be cheaper for you, so you're going to buy more on imports. So your NX is going to fall. The opposite is true when exchange rate falls. And trade protection in general terms means the trade protections in countries you're exporting to. So if there's greater trade protection, your exports are going to be less competitive and they're going to fall and relative to imports, so that has a negative effect on aggregate demand. So those are the main components of aggregate demand and how each of these factors affect them. Just always try to think logically how these factors affect aggregate demand. Do not try and memorize them. Well, memorize them, but when it comes to exams, you'll most likely have to explain them. So know the explanation as well. And other than that, guys, actually, I should probably cover this. If there's an increase in aggregate demand, it will look something like this. So aggregate demand would shift this way, whereas a decrease in aggregate demand would mean like that. And as you can see, macroeconomic equilibrium is something that's established when aggregate demand equals the aggregate supply. So if aggregate demand equals aggregate supply and AD increases, what happens is the real GDP in the economy is likely to rise, right? Similarly, a fall in aggregate demand would mean real GDP is fallen. And also you can see the effect on the price level, right? Price level goes down when AD decreases, price level goes up when AD increases. These are very important factors you'll learn more about in terms of inflation, deflation, and economic growth in macroeconomics. And those are some topics you should look forward to. And that's pretty much it for this aggregate demand video. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment on any topics you want me to cover. I'll most likely cover them. And see you guys later in another video.